Hey guys, this is Drafe, and I'm here today to continue the series from my crash course in entry-level IT support. Now, I know the last video was pretty lengthy, and if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. The next few videos will be relatively short, as we will be covering different types of broad computer issues and how to think about troubleshooting the problem from the ground up. You may be thinking to yourself, why so broad? The answer is usually because the problem is as simple as it won't turn on. But what does that mean for you, an entry-level IT professional? It means you have to start asking questions. Before we dive into the process, I want to point out that a lot of experienced IT professionals get caught up in their amassed knowledge. Over years and years of hands-on experience and research, a lot of us tend to approach the problem in more complicated ways. For example, when a friend or family member would tell me their computer wouldn't turn on, my first thought was something along the lines of, oh, the power supply must be out, and never, is it plugged in? Always remember to start troubleshooting at the most basic level first. Start with simple and work your way up to complicated. It'll save you a lot of time as well. Real quick, just in case. The scenario in this video will be talking about a desktop computer. In case any of the viewers are unfamiliar with what that means, it usually means that there is a separate computer device that connects to power, a keyboard, a mouse, and a computer screen, also known as a monitor, so that you can control and view the computer. A laptop computer is a computer device, keyboard, mouse, and screen all in one. There are several computers out there, such as the iMac and all-in-one computers, that bend the definition of desktop computer a little bit, but not by much. Okay, so here's the scenario. You work for a small business, and the director's desktop computer will not turn on. He calls you in to get it working as soon as possible. You show up, and sure enough, the screen is black. In this scenario, I would ask the user a couple of quick questions to help investigate. Was the computer powered on and working today? If so, did it shut off unexpectedly? And did you see any error messages or a blue screen? If the user answered yes to that first question, then you at least know that something happened while the user was on the device. And that bit of information can be remembered just in case you need to ask them for any follow-ups. If the user answered yes to the blue screen question, you know that there was a system failure and that it might have been tied to a system issue. But this wouldn't normally keep the computer from turning back on. Start the investigation. So now we begin the process of figuring out how to get the computer to power back on. And if we can't figure it out, try to narrow down that cause. Our first step is the most basic. Is the power cable plugged into the device securely? Check the power cable connection on the back of the desktop computer, as well as its connection to the power outlet. Is the power to the outlet and/or surge protector confirmed working? You can use any device, such as a light or phone charger, to check the power of the outlet you are using, or check the light on the surge protector to make sure it's on. Is the power on the power supply on the computer in the correct position? This may not be the case for the smaller desktop computers, I mean the really small ones, but full-size desktop computers usually have a power switch on the back of the computer itself. This is the power switch for the power supply, and if this is in the O position, it will not pass power from the power cable through the power supply to the rest of the computer and its components. Is the power cable bad? The best way to test this is to get a known working power cable and swap it out. Are there power lights on the computer? It could be that the computer has been working this whole time. That would mean the computer itself may be fine, but its connection to the computer screen isn't working. Okay, now we think we've covered all of the bases for the power on the computer itself. But now we need to see why nothing is showing on the computer screen. First, we're going to follow the same logic and check the power cable from the computer screen to the power outlet as well. Make sure that it is plugged in and secure on both ends. Then, you're going to check the video cable connection from the computer screen itself to the back of the computer. The only video connections you would be dealing with in this scenario would be VGA, DVI, HDMI, and display cables. Make sure that the video cable, in whatever case, is nice and secure on both ends. Then, make sure the monitor is powered on. Funny personal experience anecdote, about 25% of my support calls for this exact issue was that the power on the monitor was off. No exaggeration. Moving on. Alright, so in the event that there were no power lights on the computer itself, the power cables for the monitor and computer were confirmed secured. The outlets and power confirmed working. The cables confirmed working. Then we have to open up the machine. Disclaimer: opening computers voids warranties. It's that simple. If you have a custom built computer, this is not an issue. If you have a name brand computer purchased from a manufacturer, you may have a warranty that can be voided by just opening the device. That's all I'm going to say on that. Okay, first, before we open it up, we're going to try something. Disconnect the power from the computer and hold the power button for 5 to 10 seconds. Reconnect the power to the computer and attempt to power it back on. This can fix issues where there are persistent power issues such as brownouts, power surges, and the like. I like to call this one clearing the power cache. But what you're doing here is clearing any power that's left in the capacitors of the motherboard, and sometimes this is enough to fix problems with computers having issues powering back on after an outage or a surge. If that didn't work, unplug it again, hold that power button to clear the capacitors before starting Open Exploration Troubleshooting. We will not be touching any of the internals when we open the case in this scenario, so we do not necessarily need to be extra careful with anti-static measures. But normally, you want to open a computer in a static-free environment and use anti-static wristbands to work on a computer internals. But I digress. Lay the computer on its side, and if possible, remove any screws to access the internals. Usually you will run into Phillips head screws, but there are occasional set of flat head or combination screw heads. On a normal-sized desktop computer, there are usually 4 screws on the back side of the computer on the outside edges, right? The edges. You usually only need to remove 2 screws from one of these vertical edges, and the side of the computer should slide away from the front of the computer and pop off with relative ease. On these types of computers, the side you need to slide open is the side opposite your motherboard so that you can see all of the computer components, as seen in the screenshot. Sometimes you may run into Toolless computer cases, which are awesome. They only require flipping switches, levers, or buttons to open the case instead of removing screws. In the event that you have a small form factor computer, like a computer the size of a college textbook or smaller, there may be more or less screws to deal with, and a different process to access the internals. In this scenario, you may need to look up the model number of that device, which is generally found on the back on a label, and Google how to open up that computer. So, this baby is opened up, and we're going to do our last bit of troubleshooting visually. Plug in the computer and make sure that the power supply of the device is on. Now, look inside at the components on the computer. Do you see any lights on the motherboard? If the answer is yes, then it might be as simple as the power button is broken. This can be a pain to fix, and the technical details are not covered in this, but usually you would disconnect the power button from the motherboard and test it with a known working power button. If the answer is no, then it could mean a few things. It could mean that the power supply is actually dead, especially if there are no power indicator lights on the power supply itself. Or it could mean that the motherboard itself is dead. If there are no lights on the motherboard in the computer, this simply means that power cannot go to any other components in the system either. In rare occurrences, the power connection can become loose from the power supply to the motherboard itself. It's only rare because of how difficult it is to unplug them. Bumping the cable out from the motherboard is relatively unlikely. And this is where our troubleshooting journey ends in regards to power for now. As an entry-level IT professional, even opening the case of a computer might be outside of your assigned duties, so obviously do not do this type of troubleshooting unless you have been permitted to do so. It's also nice to give anyone a disclaimer that if they have a warranty on the device, that you opening it may void it. Haha, see? I told you this one would be shorter. It's not that much shorter, but it's still shorter. But let's go over what was covered. We talked about making sure to start at the most basic level of troubleshooting and not to jump ahead. We briefly covered the difference between desktop and laptop computers and mentioned some outliers. We worked through a scenario with troubleshooting a power issue on a desktop computer. First, we made sure that the power outlets worked. Then we made sure that the power cables and video cables were working. Then we did a visual check on the desktop and monitor to make sure that they were powered on. We covered opening your computer and possibly voiding warranties. And finally, we covered an internal visual inspection on trying to determine the final possible cause of the power issue. Again, this was a very broad and conceptual bit of information, but it is a basic starting point for understanding one of the many different things you may end up troubleshooting as an entry-level IT professional. I did leave a few things out, so don't chastise me too much, but you will find yourself troubleshooting many more steps than this in a typical IT environment with different computer users. Everyone has quirks, and everyone has their way with technology. Some people need help, and there are those who are unfortunately helpless, and we have to help them anyway. Hope this video helps you get started with basic power troubleshooting with computers in general. Oh, and as always, if you have something to say about the video, feel free to supplement the information or blatantly contradict me in the comments. Thanks.